Excelencias, damas y caballeros, mi nombre es Javier Gutiérrez y en honor a nuestro invitado de hoy empezaré mi corta intervención en español. Sean todos bienvenidos a esta charla presidencial. Extiendo este saludo a los que nos acompañan de otras partes del mundo mediante nuestra transmisión en directo. Before we begin, please note that interpretation in the 3 official languages of the WTO is available via the earpieces provided at each seat in the council room. To begin with today's program, I would like to invite the WTO Director General, Dr. Ngosio Conjehuela, to introduce our guest of honor. Madam Director General, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Javi. Buenos días a todos. Muchas gracias por venir. Your Excellency, President Santiago, Peña Palacios, President of the Republic of Paraguay, Excellency Ruben Ramirez, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Excellency Javier Jimenez, Minister of Industry and Commerce, Excellency Roberto Moreno, Minister and Legal Advisor, Excellency Rodrigo Maluf, Deputy Minister of Industry and Commerce, Excellency Ambassador Cano Ricciardi, our own permanent representative of Paraguay to the WTO. Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I'm really delighted to welcome you, and before I go further, I would like to recognize His Excellency Ambassador Peter Olberg, who is the General Council Chair. Please, Peter, if you could stand so that the President will see you. He's our boss. I'm really delighted to welcome all of you to this 6th installment in our WTO Presidential Lecture Series. Back in 2022, we set up this series as a platform to bring some of the world's leading thinkers and policymakers here to the WTO to share their views on the big challenges of our time and offer practical ideas for the way forward. One challenge we see today is that the world could turn away from 8 decades of multilateral cooperation, anchored in shared rules and institutions, which has delivered substantially for the world tremendous peace and prosperity, and could turn away and become instead more fragmented in trade and in investment and other domains. But we have lived in that world before in the 1930s. It was poorer and more violent, even so for the rich as well. So we owe it to our children and grandchildren. More than that, those of us who have grandchildren think of them all the time. Preserving the benefits of multilateralism whilst fixing its shortcomings would help us build them a better future. I'm convinced that small and mid-sized economies have vital roles to play here. While individually they might not be large enough to significantly steer trade flows, global trade flows on their own, they collectively account for the majority of world trade and can help shape trade practices, rules, and norms. And that is why I'm not just honored, but excited to welcome to WTO the first president from the Latin American Caribbean region, GRULAG, GRULAG, we had Prime Minister Mia Mottley, so I mustn't forget that, but from the Latin America region to undertake this lecture. So President Peña Palacios, I'm very excited to welcome you to speak on the theme of sustaining multilateralism in uncertain times, the role of middle powers. The President and I met in Rio on the sideline of the Brazilian G20, and we had a really wonderful conversation. I don't know whether it was also generated by the cocktails, but it was really good. And we hit it off, and I invited him, and I'm so glad he accepted. Elected in 2023, President Peña became the youngest president in Paraguay's democratic history. He served as finance minister from 2015 to 2017, appointed to that office at a difficult moment for the country's economy. Earlier in his career, the president worked at Paraguay's central bank 2000 to 2009, and was also an academic economist publishing on monetary policy and finance issues. He then served at the IMF's Africa Department before going back home to become a member of the board of directors of Paraguay Central Bank. I have a special spot for him, being a former fellow finance minister, and we don't last too long, so we share a lot of wounds together. The president holds a master's in public administration from Columbia University School of International and Public Affairs, CIPA, and he did his undergraduate work in economics at the Catholic University of Nuestra Señora de la Asunción. Under President Peña, Paraguay registered South America's strongest rates of GDP growth in 2023 and 2024, according to IMF data. And the outlook for this year is positive as well. Like many middle powers, the country's economy is strongly tied to the global economy. Its trade to GDP ratio in 2023 was 83%. Last July, the rating agency Moody's rated Paraguay's sovereign debt as investment grade for the first time, an objective sought by the president, paving the way for lower borrowing costs and meeting a target he had set for the government. A landlocked developing economy, Paraguay faces challenges familiar to many WTO members, as was illustrated during its last trade policy review last November. Among the issues that came up were the country's efforts to diversify its exports beyond meat, soybeans, and electricity, and the vulnerability to climate change of the Paraguay-Paraná River waterway that connects the country to world markets for goods. At the same time, members during the review recognized the Paraguay for its active and constructive engagement at the WTO, particularly in agriculture negotiations. They praised its broadly open trade and investment environment and noted its reliance on regional and global trade to drive development and poverty reduction. I just spoke about ratification of the fishery subsidies agreement with His Excellency, and he made a fantastic promise. I won't say anything here, but we're expecting it in the not-too-distant future. President Peña supported the EU-Mercosur trade agreement, and I'm looking forward to hearing his vision for multilateralism and the WTO. Before handing over to him, I want to say two things. One, on a personal note, as I said, as a former finance minister of Nigeria, I know what it's like to be a reform-minded technocrat in a political job. I wish you and your team the very best in your efforts to promote good governance and growth. Second, I want to thank everyone who made this event possible. The WTO Secretariat team, particularly the Knowledge Management Section, the Information and External Relations Divisions, our interpreters, the Chief of Staff, and the rest of my front office. Please, I want to acknowledge Javier in particular, Mustafa, Victoria, for the hard work that they did to make this happen. And I end by thanking Ambassador Tan Hun Seng of Singapore, who will be moderating the fireside chat after the lecture. With that, Excellency, the floor is yours. Muchas gracias.
Madam Director General Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, thank you very much for your kind words. Ambassador Tan Hun Seng, distinguished permanent representative, esteemed guests, it is a great privilege and honor to address you here today to present Paraguay's perspective on the importance of multilateralism and the vital role of middle powers in sustaining the multilateral trading system during these very challenging times. So let me begin by saying two simple but very heartfelt words. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for giving my country, Paraguay, the opportunity to appear before this great organization. And thank you in advance for your patience in bearing with me this morning. Of course, I will not say anything surprising if I tell you that the world is today facing unprecedented challenges. Environmental crisis, economic uncertainties, volatile and unstable politics, and technological disruptions are rife and will all test our collective resilience. The old certainties that the word of the post-war consensus and even our conventional wisdom appear to be shambles. We live in a world in which the only certainty is uncertainty. And as the great Spanish philosopher Ortega y Gasset liked to repeat, there is no more terrible and distressing human feeling than the feeling of uncertainty. However, I am convinced that it is precisely during these difficult times, such as these, that multilateral institutions, and in particular this one, the WTO, have the unique opportunity not only to show the world their crucial importance, but to justify their existence. In other words, to prove that the creation of the international organization, which seeks to put order into chaos in the world of commerce, was not only a very sound decision, but a brilliant and an endurable insight. Something, my friends, which I'm convinced is absolutely true. The WTO has been, is, and will be a great idea. Allow me to share a perspective from a distinctive and particular point of view. While Paraguay might not be the first country that comes to mind when discussing global trade, I believe that my country's journey can offer valuable insight into the role middle powers play in strengthening the multilateral system. Our history has shown us that cooperation, coordination, and collaboration are the only weapons that can kill instability, uncertainty, and conflict. An astute commentator once said that Paraguay history is so striking and exceptional that it should not be written in prose, but in verse, as the great Homeric poems. Many of you here may not know this, but Paraguay was the most prosperous and developed country in South America in the middle of the 19th centuries. We had the first steam train in the continent, formidable industries and manufacturing, and we were the only country in which analphabetism was eradicated in the continent. However, our early success proved to be fatal. Commercial tensions and controversies arising out of our leading position led to conflict. We learned in the most painful way that commercial controversies in a world with no multilateral institutions such as the WTO can only be solved by war. Our giant and powerful neighbors, Brazil and Argentina, united together with Uruguay, signed a secret treaty, the Treaty of the Triple Alliance, or of the Triple Infamy, as the Argentinian jurist Alberdi, censoring his own government, famously called it. Also drafted in euphemistic terms, the real object of the treaty was the total extermination of the Paraguayan people and our elimination as a country, due in part to those economic and commercial tensions. The consequences of the war were truly disastrous for my country. Nearly 90%, 90, of Paraguay's male population was killed. 2/3 of its population was either decimated or made prisoner. We lost 60% of our territory. Our industry and commerce were destroyed, and our development halted for over a century. Just when we were beginning to stand up again, the hammer of Mars fell again, and we had the painful 3-year Chaco War with Bolivia in the 1930s. The aftermath of this war, in turn, heralded the reign of strong men as Paraguay lived under military dictatorship until 1989. During much of that time, Paraguay became an island surrounded by land, as the great Paraguayan writer Augusto Roa Basto called, avoiding conflict but paying the heavy price of disconnection from the world, including economic isolation. Finally, in 1989, the longest democratic experiment in our history began. One of the more fortunate consequences of this was the reinsertion of Paraguay into the world, and our embrace of multilateralism as the keystone to our foreign policy. War is sweet only to those who have never tried, as the immense European Erasmus of Rotterdam once said. Paraguay knows the wisdom of this dictum, and this is why during the last 35 years, we have embarked in a journey of institutional transformation that has embraced multilateralism and free commerce as the true vanquishers of violence and conflict. My country also understands the significance of stability and resilience against uncertainty. Over the last 2 decades, while much of our region has experienced significant volatility, economic crisis, and constant flirting with populism, Paraguay chose a different path, one of quiet but profound transformation. This transformation has been built on three pillars: macroeconomic stability, institutional strength, and environmental sustainability. We have been the highest growing economy in the past years in the continent and are said to be one of the best performers in Latin America in 2025. Our commitment to sound economic management was recently recognized when we achieved an investment-grade rating from Moody's, a testament to decades of consistent, responsible policies transcending political cycles. Paraguay is also one of the most open economies in the world, anchored in the belief that free commerce is the bedrock of civilized people. In fact, we are the second most open economy in Latin America, with no significant restrictions on trade, a simple tax system, and a markedly pro-business stance. As a landlocked country and primarily agricultural exporter, producing food for 10 times our population, we have no other alternative. It is very difficult to emphasize and highlight the great handicap that being landlocked entails. This is why we understand both the opportunities and vulnerabilities of global trade. Our experience has shown us the path to development requires not isolation, but deeper integration into global market, guided by clear, fair, and enforceable rules. For a middle-sized economy like Paraguay, the multilateral trading system is not just an option among many. It is simply essential for our development and prosperity. This is why I believe that any crisis of multilateralism can only be solved with one thing: more multilateralism. Thus, I'm convinced that the WTO truly plays a crucial role in our world, assuring peaceful alternative to conflict by enabling free commerce and making our people prosperous. Thank you. And yet, I cannot limit myself to painting a rosy picture here today. The situation of the world today, and the WTO in particular, requires honest and open discussion. While its achievements have been remarkable, the organization faces significant structural challenges that, with due respect, we need to be addressed. I will mention some of them here. First, regarding the negotiating function of the WTO, the continuation of agricultural reform stands as one of the most pressing unresolved issues. The promise of substantial reduction in support and protection made the developing countries during the Uruguay round remains largely unfulfilled. Agricultural markets remain among the most distorted in global trade. What is allowed in agriculture and supported by many members was deemed so detrimental to trade that this very organization banned it from non-agricultural goods. Moreover, those deadly enemies of free trade and fairness, the agricultural subsidies, have not only not been eliminated, but are thriving again. I cannot emphasize here now how much this hurt countries like Paraguay, who are doing their homework and yet must face these unjust travesties of free commerce. Of course, subsidies are not limited to agriculture, since some great powers extend them to whole industries, which leave absolutely no chance to smaller economies such as Paraguay. Subsidies are the mortal enemies of free trade, my friends. They are simply unfair, and they offend any sense of justice in trade. I beseech you here today, let us put an end to this practice. For our part, Paraguay has consistently advocated for progress in agricultural negotiations, particularly concerning market access improvement and the reduction of subsidies that distort production and trade. Agriculture is not just a source of revenue for us, it is the backbone of our economy and a means for livelihood for many Paraguayans. While multilateralism remains our primary goal, we appreciate progress made through joint statement initiatives, which have brought new dynamism to the organization. Paraguay actively participates in this initiative, including services domestic regulations, investment facilitation for development, and electronic commerce. While maintaining our commitment to multilateral outcomes, we recognize the value of this initiative in advancing the system. Secondly, concerning dispute settlement, this is another disfiguring blemish in the current system, And once again, smaller countries are the main victims of its failure. The system is simply not working, and thus, countries take unilateral measures without consideration of the consequences. Obviously, more developed countries are benefited by this, to the detriment of developing nations. The current impasse in the appellate body represents a fundamental change to the system's credibility. The dispute settlement mechanism initially was one of the most promising tools of the WTO, providing access to an impartial and binding mechanism for resolving conflicts, irrespective of member size or relative powers. This is what made the WTO different from other international organizations, enforceable rules. However, without an effective mechanism for resolving conflicts, the system falls into the might make right logic. Under this principle, convincing members to negotiate new rules becomes senseless when existing ones cannot be enforced. And if rules cannot be enforced, well, the system loses virtues and attractiveness. Paraguay, along with other members, has consistently called for the immediate resolution of the appellate body impasse. We recently missed the deadline for a fully functioning dispute settlement system by 2024. So I urge you today, dear members, to work together to restore and relaunch this essential pillar of our organization. Thirdly, regarding the matter of monitoring and transparency, while the organization faces various challenges, it is important to recognize that the monitoring function of the WTO continues to thrive. This is often an overlooked area of work, but one that is vital for members, particularly developing ones. The regular committees serve a crucial dual purpose. They constitute a forum for transparency and effective implementation of WTO agreements, while also providing an opportunity to address trade concerns on an equal standing basis. The transparency obligations provide invaluable commercial intelligence that allow members, especially those with relatively smaller diplomatic presence globally, to become acquainted with upcoming regulations and address potential trade concerns before they affect exports. Despite our size, Paraguay has been an active participant in this monitoring function, demonstrating that middle and small countries can be key players and have their position heard through cooperation and alliance building. This aspect of the WTO work deserves more recognition for its role in facilitating trade and preventing disputes. Fourthly, regarding sustainability and resource management. As the world faces increasing environmental pressure and extreme weather events, the WTO must play a constructive role in supporting sustainable practice while preventing protectionism disguised as an environmental measure. Paraguay brings unique credentials to this discussion. Our energy matrix is 100% renewable thanks to our hydroelectric capacity. We maintain 40% of our forest coverage, and our agricultural sector employs some of the most sustainable practices in the world. For instance, 97% of our soya production occurs on land that hasn't been deforested since 2005, and almost all cultivation use direct seeding techniques, which are recognized globally for soil conservation. We actively participate in various international initiatives focused on sustainable development and resource management. Our recent co-authorship of the Ministerial Declaration on Environmental Challenges, supported by over 60 developing members, demonstrate how middle powers can build bridges and foster collaboration based on shared interests rather than imposed measures. Finally, there is that most basic and yet fundamental matter of justice and equality in international trade. The current rules of the system are in many cases biased or beneficial to the most developing economies, who can negotiate better conditions and then dress their protectionism measures under the environmental or sanitary barriers. A striking, yet by no means isolated instance, is Resolution 1115 of the European Union, which is so disadvantageous to countries such as Paraguay. Earlier, I said that difficult times give institutions such as the WTO the opportunity to justify themselves. So let me be very loud and clear. If the WTO cannot secure a minimum of justice and fairness among nations, whether strong or weak, then it simply cannot justify itself to the world. Moreover, many great corporations and multinationals have proven to be stronger than independent countries. Once again, responding to the logic of the lion, might makes right. This is another distortion that the system must face and defeat. Without denying the importance that private companies have in promoting growth and trade, they can never, and let me be very clear, never have a stronger voice than a sovereign nation. Dear friends, middle powers have a distinct responsibility in the current global context. They understand both the aspiration of developing nations and the concerns of the larger economies. This unique perspective allows them to serve as bridge builders, fostering dialogue and consensus. Paraguay's commitment to this role stems from its deep conviction that multilateralism remains the most effective path to sustainable development. Only a stable, free, and fair international trade system can defeat not only poverty, but that ominous threat of martial conflict. The WTO is a great institution with the potential to redeem a crucial aspect of humanity, commerce. But it has challenges ahead, challenges which we must be overcome. So I urge you to look together to a better and brighter future in which the WTO makes changes. We need meaningful progress on agricultural reform to achieve less distorted market and enhance food security. We must restore a fully functioning dispute settlement system accessible to all members. We must ensure that environmental measures enhance rather than hinder international trade. We must secure justice, fairness, and equality as the most fundamental principle of international commerce. And remember, any crisis of multilateralism can only be solved with more multilateralism. Paraguay stands ready to play its part. We offer our experience as a country which has seen the horrible effects of war in a world with no multilateralism, and that has constructed a stable democracy with consistent economic policies, with a unique perspective as a bridge between different levels of development. So let me close on a high note. I believe in the WTO. I believe in the WTO great achievement of the past. I believe in WTO present fight for equality in commerce. And more importantly, I believe in WTO futures, which I'm certain will be a great one. And finally, and this is more on a personal note, I want to thank you, Dr. Ngozi, because your leadership in leading this institution has not only given a word for the development world, but for many nations that we have been working. I know you for many years. I saw your career at the World Bank, and now I see your leadership here at the WTO. And please count with Paraguay to be someone on the table and trying to bring other countries to the table to work on a greater, more stronger WTO. Thank you very much.
Well, Mr. President, thank you very much for your comprehensive and thought-provoking lecture. It was impressive both in terms of breadth and depth, and thank you also for sharing with us the unique lived experience of Paraguay. As a small country, trade-dependent like Paraguay, your messages really resonated with me. Mr. President, if you allow me, I would like to pick up some of the key points that you have highlighted and get the ball rolling by posing a couple of questions for you. Mr. President, you have rightly emphasized that the WTO has been a force for good in at least three ways. One, the WTO, which is the anchor of the rules-based multilateral trading system, has enabled global trade to flourish and lifted millions out of poverty. Two, it has provided the predictability and certainty that is necessary for businesses to grow. And three, it has prevented the global trading system from descending into a state where might is right, as you have described it, and where the law of the jungle prevails. However, the WTO, the multilateral trading system, and indeed multilateralism in general have come under stress in recent years. Against this backdrop, and in the face of a polycrisis, which included climate change, rising geopolitical tensions, and economic inequalities, we would love to hear your views, Mr. President, on what are the concrete actions that middle powers, as you have described them, can collectively take to strengthen and future-proof the system. In short, how can middle powers, in your words, cooperate, coordinate, and collaborate better in order to make the multilateral trading system stronger?
I think the most important thing is not to be shy on raising your voice to express ideas. I think in a world of polarization and conflict, countries that want to bring together, to be a bridge, have remained silent. And this applied on internal politics and also applies at the multilateral stage. So Paraguay is not only a central location at the heart of South America, but also has been a way of these political swings on ideologies. And we have played a role in bringing countries together. And we are doing this within Mercosur. As you all know, presidents of Brazil and Argentina, they don't get along very well, but they both get along very well with Paraguay. So people think that being in the center and the middle is the easy part, and is in fact the hardest part, because being on the extremes is very easy. You just sit on your corner and you yell to everybody. But being on the middle, you need to mediate, you need to bring countries together. So Paraguay is playing more and more this role. In fact, we are not only raising the voice and talking about this, but we are also proposing. And there are many stages for multilateralism to work. One of them is the Organization of American States. This organization will take a new leadership in this year. There are elections in May, and Paraguay, who is proposing to enhance the capability of the OEAs and to strengthen multilateral system, said, I'm willing to cut my arm for this institution to flourish. So I have proposed that the Minister of Foreign Relations of Paraguay to be the next Secretary General of the OEAs. We are working with the IMF. Paraguay is probably one of the few countries that is not a problem in terms of macro stability. But even though we have come to the table to the IMF to show that some of the ideas that the Director General, Kristalina Georgieva, is proposing to look at more on sustainability. So Paraguay is one of the leading countries on the new facilities that the IMF is giving. It's providing a financing facility for countries that are abiding to the highest standards in terms of sustainability, an asset that was not seen from the side of the IMF. So my concrete answer is we need to be bold, we need to be very ambitious, and we need to leave behind that image of isolation. We need to sometimes be louder than the voices that are trying to set us apart. And we need to be louder for those two that we want to bring us together. So, and this plays at the different roles. And personally, myself, being a civil servant my entire career, and now being president of Paraguay, is a great opportunity to engage at the very, very high level in my region, but also beyond my region. I had the opportunity for the first time in the history of my country that we were invited for the G20. And this was a great opportunity for G20 countries to hear from a middle power to talk about things that are very important to us, that sometimes they are not on the table of a typical G20 meeting. So, of course, these support the argument of multilateralism, the role of the WTO, the role of the IMF, the World Bank, and all the multilateral systems. So I think that we need to raise the voice and we need to encourage other countries who are doing the right thing, but they are doing silently, to be more outspoken and to reach other countries.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for your very practical, concrete advice. I can share your sentiments about small countries being squeezed on both sides. Yeah. But you have made the important point that middle powers must need to act as bridge builders. We must show thought leadership, and we must be bold. I'd now like to ask Dr. Ngozi whether you have anything to add. I'm sure you do.
Well, I want to thank the President. Not very much. I do share the point that if you look at middle powers, you see that for most of them, their trade to GDP ratio is quite high, ranging anywhere from 30 to 40% to 300% in the case of Singapore. So they really depend very strongly on the system. And I love this issue of speak up more, but like you said, Mr. President, they don't speak up. I also think they need to get together more.
Yes.
And join their voices together. In this fora, WTO provides one fora where I think middle powers, they know themselves, can come together and speak with one voice and say, look, this really matters for us. Therefore, we need to advance, we need to progress on certain issues. So that's what I want to add. The mechanisms for middle powers to talk to each other more and then lift up their voices collectively. I think that would be very important.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ngozi. Can I just pick up a little bit on what you have said, Mr. President, about middle powers? And you have said that there is a tendency for middle powers to face pressure on both sides, being squeezed from both ends. What advice would you have for middle powers who some, as Dr. Ngozi has said, may feel afraid to speak up for fear of being squeezed from both sides? What concrete advice would you like to share?
In the case of Paraguay, which we have remained mostly isolated for many decades, we need to understand that in any negotiation, it's not what you want, but what you can achieve. And try to also understand the other side of the table, what is their view. So we need to understand that it's in our best interest not only to understand our strengths, but also understand what are the pressures on the other sides. I give you a concrete example. The case of Brazil. Brazil is our largest trading partner, a very important country for Paraguay. We trade almost 60% of all the trade with Brazil, but Brazil is a continent. We cannot think that Brazil will think the same way as Paraguay thinks. We need to understand their way of thinking. Of course, we have the aim to develop the nation, to create jobs, and that's exactly the same thing that they want. So my development cannot come at the expense of their development. We need to find a win-win situation, and we are the ones who need to do most of the heavy load in understanding how to find these solutions. So we have been very successful in finding those areas of common interest, and Paraguay has benefited a lot. Brazil, in recent years, have become the largest foreign direct investor in Paraguay. Brazil does a lot of trade with many countries around the world, and as they continue to expand their export, they are also expanding their imports. And many of those imports, they cannot produce it in Brazil, they cannot compete, but if a Brazilian company can produce in Paraguay at a more competitive prices and just very short distance, is more efficient. One of the strengths of Paraguay is that we are faster, we are agile, we have lowered many of the barriers that many countries have. We don't protect any particular sectors, and we try to give a level playing field for everybody. And these have yielded in great results. We have the largest hydroelectric dam in the world is a shared company between Paraguay and Brazil. They have the incentive always to keep price of energy very low. Since we are exporting 80% of electricity, we have the incentive to try to find a balance between price and the level of investment that we need to do. And we were able to find that. But our strategy has been always to understand also what is their strategy and understand. The same applies on our relation with the U.S., which is our second largest trading partner. We always claim that Paraguay is probably one of the best friends that the U.S. has in Latin America, but we have one problem. We are not a problem. And most of the time, large countries only pay attention to troubled countries. So we have been changing this dynamic, and we are trying also to have a different approach. It's not only what we go to a negotiation to ask, but what is that we are also bringing to the table. In fact, Paraguay is probably one of the few countries in the world that doesn't have a trade surplus with the U.S. We have a trade deficit with them. So I think that the most important thing is trying to understand, because all the countries are looking for the same objective. We want to develop our country. We want to give answers to the increasing demands from the population. So we need to find those mutual interests. And of course, going back to the initial argument, the importance of multilateralism. This also brings common sense to the table and not only a tip-for-tack negotiation, something that is beneficial to the entire world.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. Fantastic answer. The emphasis is that we must strive for win-win outcomes. As middle powers, we need to have a greater sense of empathy.
Yes.
We must understand what the other side, especially the bigger side, wants. And we must be able to bring value add to the table. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Mr. President, for my second question, allow me to move from 25,000 feet to 5,000 feet and ask more specifically about the long-standing agriculture negotiations, which you have described as one of the WTO's most pressing unresolved issues. As an overwhelmingly agricultural exporting country that produces food for 10 times its population, it is understandable that Paraguay has been very active in the agriculture negotiations. Hence, I'm sure the audience will be very interested to hear your assessment of one, what you see as the future of the agricultural negotiations, and two, what concrete steps should members take to deliver a meaningful outcome at MC14?
I'm an optimistic by nature. Even if you show me a glass of water with very little water, I will tell you that it's half full. I'm very optimistic. If you ask me, well, this is half full, but I'm very optimistic. When I see a problem, I see an opportunity, and I always try to solve problems. So my dream and my objective is to resolve these issues as soon as possible in a way that is reasonable, because this is not only a nation-to-nation or bloc-to-bloc negotiation. This is also a negotiation within the countries and inside of the countries. But because the same way that I'm raising my voice from Paraguay to the world, that we want to be treated fairly and we want to have more trade on agricultural products, I also have to go back on the inside of Paraguay and talk to producers who are also concerned and who are afraid, and they are demanding me as President of the Republic to defend Paraguay. And if you need to leave the WTO, leave the WTO. I mean, there are some extremists also who have those positions. So a couple of months ago, when we were in the middle of the discussion of the Mercosur-EU negotiations and the implication that it may have, I was having to face an uplift of producers who were very concerned, and said, we're going to block the country and we're going to not allow. So I said, don't worry, we're going to talk. So I went to a meeting, and there was a room double the size of this room with producers that, of course, they don't have all the knowledge about international trade and regulation. They were just afraid that they're not going to be able to sell their products. So I went there, and we spoke for 5 hours, and I was answering all of the concerns that they have. So we need to try to find that balance between the internal discussion and the international discussion. And so I'm very optimistic because I know it makes sense. This is, I understand the pressures that other countries have about their local producers, and many of the time, like in this country, in Switzerland, cattle raisers and cow raisers, this is part of the culture, and they don't want to lose it. But the reality is that they cannot compete with a country like Paraguay. It's impossible. Like, we cannot compete with watches made in Switzerland or chocolate made in Switzerland. It's impossible for us. But in producing some product like beef or milk, we're extremely efficient and we're very competitive. So we need to find a way how to manage internal pressure with this idea of more trade and the international level. That at the end is beneficial for everybody. I mean, this is what Adam Smith made in his famous the book, The Wealth of Nations, comparative advantage. And countries start to specialize in some things, and other countries start to specialize on others. So we need to be very mindful on this because politics has become extremely divided. And this is true for politicians, this is true for every country. So as we gather here in this great organization, and we are expecting that all head of nations are willing to come to the table and promote these ideas, the reality is that they have to go back to their countries and they have to face a pressure that none of us will be able to face, right? So managing those expectations from the population is very important, and it requires a lot of commitment, common sense, and at the end is institutional building.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I think you have hit the nail on its head when you say that it's always a constant tussle between balancing domestic demands and pressures and also trying to achieve your domestic objective without sacrificing systemic interest.
Yes.
And I think that is a very important point that I hope all members around the room will take to heart today. Dr. Ngozi, we would love to hear your take, especially about leaving the WTO.
Well, you know I'm very naughty. Sometimes when I hear that, if it's causing a problem, Paraguay has not really at the WTO, at least whilst you're fierce in agriculture, I see that the attitude you've adopted, you said something very important, and that's your attitude. We can't get all we want.
Yes.
We will negotiate for something we can live with. And it is really a very important principle. That's what I'd like to stress. That, of course, agriculture is so important domestically in each and every country, and we understand that. But I think you did something. You went out, you sat with the farmers for 5 hours. You also told me earlier you travel around the country to various parts, sitting with communities to explain to them about the CBAM and other instruments and to help allay their fears and tell them, don't worry, we'll find a way. And then to let them know that they have to live with other nations within the international community. I think what we need here is more of this give and take. I can't get everything I want, but let me take something I can live with and also explain to my constituencies that there are other considerations and other powers and other countries and other members to deal with. It would really help us to look to adopt more of that. I think negotiations would move faster.
Yeah.
So if you press on with that attitude at the WTO, I think we could learn quite a bit from you.
Yeah. One more thing, because I think this is important and something that I learned through the process of negotiation, even when you negotiate with your spouse. I have been married for 28 years, a long time, so you need to know how to negotiate. And there are two basic principles on negotiation. One, your first proposal, you need to feel ashamed of it. You need to feel ashamed, and this is something that we always discuss with my legal advisor. I say, this is too much, that's okay, it's a good proposal if you feel ashamed. And the second one is that when you end a negotiation, none of the part should feel satisfied. None of the part. That's a good negotiation. When both parts feel that they are not fully happy, that's a good negotiation. And this should not be bad. And one of the problems, and this is one of the advantages of having a female running the organization, that means we have so much ego and an excess, and you know, sometimes an excess of testosterone is not good for negotiations because we always want to win. So even though our proposal, we feel ashamed, we stick to it, right? Because of pride and all that. So I think we need to try to find the balance between your dreams and the things that you want to achieve. But at the end, on the other side of the table, there's someone who is doing the same thing. And you need to have the empathy to understand that. So I think this is what we need. We need more women in leadership positions.
Well, well, you can understand how I started to love this president and said, after talking to him on the sidelines of G20, I said he has to come. I've been married for 45 years, and I totally agree with you on that. I wanted to add something, that countries also have egos. You know, men have egos, women have egos, maybe smaller, but countries have egos. And when that country ego is so strong and it cannot also give way to a little bit of ego to the other countries, then it becomes a problem. Okay. And so I totally share your message. I think if we can, I had this joke that was published in a paper that when I'm in a negotiation, I put my ego in my handbag. Yeah. If we could do a bit more of that, I think we would advance. Thank you for your wise words.
Thank you.
Can I ask if your bag is a big bag or a small bag?
It's usually a big bag, but I recently, 2 weeks ago, started carrying a small bag.
Good.
Well, I hope that my wife of 33 years is listening, and I will pass on your advice, Mr. President. Can I just pick up on the point that you made? You said that you spent 5 hours talking to a room full of producers,
yes,
farmers. My question is, the WTO is very often a very alien concept,
yes,
to the man in the street, especially to the farmers.
Yes.
Can you share with us your experience on how you make it real, relatable, understandable to that room full of producers?
I think the most important thing that we need to create is trust. And you build trust being honest and being transparent. And don't be afraid on the things that I don't know, but I will do my best. And I think this also applies to the multilateral system. We need that the multilateral system is trusted. We need to have that. And again, I have to acknowledge that for developed nations, less developed nations, having someone who comes from a country like Nigeria, that even though it's a very large and very advanced, it will rely much more to countries that are less developed. And this creates trust. I trust on the capacity of Dr. Ngozi to lead this organization. I trust on the work that Ajay Banga is doing at the World Bank. I trust on the work that Kristolina Georgieva is doing at the IMF. So this is a process that is building with a lot of hard work, and it requires a lot of patience. And nobody's going to give you for granted. You need to earn it. You need to own it. I ran for president the first time in 2017. I was only 36 years old. I was Minister of Finance, and I thought that as Minister of Finance, I was the Lion King in the jungle. I was able to do all the good things, but I realized that if you really want to make substantial change, you need to be elected official, because this is the way that people give you the power to do the real changes. And I have this, and this is very important. It was very important for me, and I think it's important for the challenge that we go ahead. It doesn't matter how much you know, it's how much you are able to convince others of the good things that you think that you know. So and of course, my experience as a teacher and working in academia, it gives you a good handicap in talking to people, in explaining to people, and having the patience to understand that on the other side of the table is going to be someone that probably doesn't have your experience, that have your formation, but you need to build the trust and the confidence that even though he knows that you don't know all the answers, you're going to do your hardest to protect them and to help them go through. So I think this is the most important thing, is build trust and confidence.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, for your very candid sharing. That trust is paramount, and it's not how much we know, but how much we can convince others. I'm aware of the time running out on us, so I would now like to open the floor and invite questions from the audience. You would be happy to know that the President had earlier indicated to me that he looks forward to answering some difficult questions. So I hope we'll be able to hear some tough questions from the floor. I see some hands. Yes, can I have the ambassador over there?
Thank you very much. I am ambassador of Slovenia. Buenos días, estimado presidente Peña, señora directora general, queridos colegas. Bienvenido a Ginebra. Voy a hablar en inglés. Thank you, first of all, for mentioning the strong support for women in leadership positions. That is really something that my country is also a very, very strong believer in. You have served in many positions throughout your illustrious career. Among others, as an academic, you taught international economics. Game theory explains the dynamic between cooperation and unilateral actions and the balance of risk and opportunity. What do you recommend to us here at the WTO, as membership of the WTO, in current geopolitical climate, in order to ensure that cooperation remains the first best approach for all? Muchísimas gracias y mejores deseos para usted y su país.
Thank you very much. I will suggest that the WTO takes a bolder and a louder position. And I think that you are in a particular interesting times. I think that the current leadership, having a woman with all the experience that Dr. Ngozi have, is fundamental. But of course, she represents the organization. She needs to have the backing of all members of the organization. I have no doubt that she is a great communicator. She has the capacity to bring world leaders to the table. I think that she has built that trust and confidence. But the organization as an international body needs the support and is shaped by all of its membership. So I am encouraging other countries to come to the table. If they have concerns, if they don't like the outcomes, they will be better off coming to the table, sitting and explaining their position than giving their back. Because the representation at the top of the WTO, it represents the organization of all of the countries. So I will strongly suggest that we bring the WTO to the front of the discussion, and for that, You need to raise your voice, and you have to be very loud and very clear, and to explain the things that are working and be very clear the things that are not working without naming and shaming any country. We don't need to do that. If you want to make a strong argument, you don't need to criticize a country, but you can advocate for the right causes and the principles and the values that we want to promote. I mean, that was the origin of the multilateral system. It was not against something, it was to promote the good things. So my word of advice and experience is we don't need to be shy anymore. I think that we have remained shy for many years. We have remained silent for people that was yelling at us, sometimes bullying at us, and we need to fight for the right causes.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dr. Ngozi, would you like to add something? No. Thank you. I would also...
The man in the back, that was the first one.
Okay,
to raise.
the gentleman over
Yes.
there. But can I just ask you to identify yourself before you pose your question? Thank you.
Thank you. I'm ambassador from Colombia. I will speak in Spanish.
Great.
Please. Bienvenido a la OMC. Usted ha dicho cosas muy importantes frente a las temáticas que discutimos diariamente aquí en la OMC. Ha hablado de los temas importantes de la agricultura, las subvenciones, el sistema de solución de diferencias, la gestión sostenible y la justicia y la igualdad en el comercio internacional. Y ha dicho algo muy importante, no ser tímidos y elevar la voz. En razón de eso, quisiera preguntarle sus recomendaciones y sus reflexiones alrededor de cuando se utilizan los aranceles como castigo comercial y se alteran las normas de la Organización Mundial del Comercio. Sería muy importante para nosotros conocer sus opiniones en ese sentido. Gracias, presidente.
Muchas gracias, embajador. Le voy a responder en español también. Primero que nada, reconocer a Colombia como una nación que en el momento más difícil de nuestra existencia, al final de la guerra de 1870, aprobó una ley en el Congreso de Colombia diciendo que ningún paraguayo sería un paria y que el momento de pisar suelo colombiano adquiriría todos los privilegios de un ciudadano colombiano. Y eso a nosotros nos une un sentido de gratitud y de cariño con Colombia que nunca se va a olvidar. Así que muchísimas gracias. Con respecto a la imposición de tarifas, nosotros somos muy claros. Nosotros creemos en un mundo donde el comercio fluye libremente. Nosotros promovemos la integración de los mercados. Nosotros somos unos fieles defensores de las economías de mercado con menos políticas restrictivas y, por supuesto, esto también aplica a menos políticas arancelarias. Somos parte del Mercosur, el Mercado Común del Sur, un experimento comercial con ya 34 años desde su creación, que lo que buscó fue disminuir las tarifas, no aumentar las tarifas. Hemos ido disminuyendo las tarifas de manera gradual y hoy tenemos probablemente una de las menores tarifas dentro de nuestro comercio. Esto ha permitido que el comercio crezca. Ahora, acá se aplica muy bien, ¿verdad?, lo que yo le decía sobre las políticas de cada país y los objetivos que están buscando cada país. Podemos de manera global proponer que haya cada vez menos tarifas o condenar a los países que quieren aplicar esas tarifas, pero también tenemos que entender desde la óptica de esos países. Y el caso específico estoy seguro que se aplica a la política que hoy la administración del presidente Trump está implementando desde Estados Unidos. No solamente con países latinoamericanos, sino con todos los países del mundo, donde ellos dicen, después de haber propuesto, el libre comercio, el ingreso de China a la Organización Mundial de Comercio, la disminución de tarifas, nosotros sentimos como pueblo americano de que estamos perdiendo la batalla comercial, que estamos siendo perjudicados, para lo cual ahora vamos a tener una política más restrictiva sobre el comercio, imponiendo tarifas a algunos países. Creo que podemos, obviamente, de nuestra lógica condenar esto, pero ahí es donde tenemos que tratar de entender de dónde están viniendo estas políticas de estos países, ¿verdad? Las restricciones no son solamente arancelarias, porque acá estamos hablando sobre las tarifas, pero hay muchos problemas con barreras no arancelarias que le siguen haciendo un daño tremendo y que muchas veces no las hablamos. Y Paraguay sufre de eso también. Nosotros capaz que no podemos reclamar los aranceles dentro del Mercosur, pero sí reclamamos todavía barreras no arancelarias que son impuestas sobre países pequeños. Así que respondiendo a su pregunta, nuestra propuesta es clara.
To what the President said, that I think that in these times, when trade tools may be used for non-trade issues, that I think we should react in a very calm manner. That does not take away from the pride that the country has in itself. I think being calm and deliberate leads us to think of multiple approaches to solving the problem. And I suggest that we try those approaches, and Colombia just recently did. More dialogue, try to go use channels for dialogue in certain cases, and sometimes it does succeed. So that is let's calm prevail. Let's not get too excited. My famous words, let's chill first. And then we can look at how to act. And that may lead us to good solutions. I want to also commend Colombia because I think just now we had a win-win approach to the issue of immigration. Colombia won and United States won. And if we can generate win-win outcomes, Colombia brought its citizens back in a humane and decent manner, which is what the president's objective was. I saw pictures of them smiling on the presidential plane and the other planes that were sent. So obviously, he scored good points with his citizens, and so did President Trump. So let's look for win-win outcomes. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have 5 requests from the floor, and they are from my friend, the Ambassador of Saudi Arabia, Sakar, and then my friend from Honduras, Dacio, then the Ambassador of Philippines, Malaysia, and then Colin. So we'll go in that order. We have, and then I see another hand, Nigeria. We have only about 12 minutes left, so please keep your question concise so that we could hear the responses of the President. So the floor is yours, Sakar.
Thank you, and Ambassador Tan. And first, I would like to thank His Excellency President Santiago Peña for his very wise advice to this House at this uncertain times. It's just a question about building the trust. Also, how can the chairpersons, the facilitators of the negotiations, gain the trust of the entire membership during the negotiations? So I leave this for you. Thank you, Excellency.
I just maybe collect
Okay.
all the
Yes,
questions.
that was what
Yes.
I was thinking of. So, Dacio.
Muchísimas gracias y bienvenido, señor presidente. Gracias por su ponencia y permítame felicitarlo por la alta representación que usted tiene en esta casa, dirigida a través del embajador Raúl Cano. Como latinoamericanos nos sentimos muy orgullosos de tener este nivel. Presidente, en los contextos de los cambios geopolíticos y las nuevas administraciones en economías claves, ¿cómo planea su gobierno posicionar al Paraguay estratégicamente en el comercio global? ¿Y qué considera usted que se debería hacer en esta organización desde un punto de vista de reforma para poder enfrentar todos estos nuevos desafíos y traer estas nuevas administraciones a la mesa de negociación? Gracias, presidente.
Thank you, Dacio. I next give the floor to Manuel, Philippines, and then Malaysia, again, Colin, and Nigeria, in that order.
Bienvenido, señor presidente. For the Philippines, the question I have is that, indeed, as you mentioned, the multilateral trading system and free trade is indeed the way to go, more multilateralism. However, you also forewarn us of success, the dangers of success. So the multilateral trading system has helped improve living standards across the globe. And indeed, some countries have been quite successful. As you said, China has been quite successful, and this has led to geopolitical tensions. As Paraguay was successful, which led to hot war, that is one of the greatest risks we face today, is hot war. And that is, I guess, the main concern we have here in the WTO, is how to lessen these geopolitical tensions. Dr. Ngozi says we have to move towards re-globalization and show the benefits of integrating and regional supply chains. So maybe you can give us your insight on how we can avoid the danger of this hot tension. Thank you.
Thank you, Manuel. Malaysia.
Thank you, moderator, for the floor. Thank you, Mr. President, for sharing your vision and views, as well as your negotiation technique, especially with spouse. Most of us need it. Malaysia is a small trading nation, and together with another 9 ASEAN member states, we can consider ourselves as a middle power. I agree 100% with you that at the multilateral platform, we have one problem, which is, in most of the cases, we are not the problem. So, other than to speak more and to speak louder, what can be done by middle powers to ensure the main players take our views seriously at multilateral platform? Any bold advice and suggestion is highly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharia, Colin, and then Adamu.
Thank you, Mr. President. I really learned a lot from your presentation.
Give the floor to Colin first.
Thank you so much, and thank you, President Peña, for coming to WTO today and leading us in this very rich discussion. I wanted to ask about the adequacy of development finance and trade finance in the Latin American and Caribbean region. We have the IMF, we have the World Bank, we have Caribbean Development Bank, Inter-American Development Bank. You have described Paraguay as a middle country. I myself come from a small country, a very small country actually. And we believe that the finance available for trade, especially trade in services, is not adequate to the needs of the region. And in fact, most of our regional financial institutions are too small to meet the trade and development needs of the region. Your views?
Thank you. And the last question from Adamu.
Thank you, Mr. President. My name is Ambassador Adamu Mohammed Abdul Hamid, Ambassador of Nigeria to the WTO. I learned a lot from your presentation as well as the question and answer sessions. Mr. President, apart from the usual traditional issues that have been discussed or negotiated in the WTO, which of course you have mentioned some of them, agriculture, technical barriers to trade and others, Some of us feel that we are in the 21st century and there is the need to update the rule book in the WTO. What is your advice to some who still don't believe that other new issues could be multilateralized in the WTO, something like e-commerce, investment facilitation for development, and then small and medium enterprises? Because there is the need for the global community to understand that we are in the 21st century and new issues unveil, and then we have future, and the future is a digital trade. So what is your view, Your Excellency? Thank you.
Thank you. So, Mr. President, you have a rich array of questions ranging from geopolitical tensions to digital trade to trade finance. So the floor is yours. Can I steal an additional 5 minutes of your time so
Sure,
that we could
absolutely.
hear all your responses? Thank you.
I will add this part of my surplus. On the first one, how to build trust. I think the most important thing is to be patient, to have to believe in the process. We need to believe in the process, and for that, we need to generate as much knowledge about the benefit. I think that we have forget about what globalization has made and all the benefit of globalization, and we have taken for granted. And this happened also in many countries who have chosen democracy, which is not the only way to run a nation, but is the preferred way of how Western nation has chosen is democracy. And many of the nations that were able to create so much wealth thanks to the freedom of the people and democracy, now they are forgetting. So it's our responsibility to show the benefit of it. And I always mention the example of Paraguay. 35 years of dictatorship versus 35 years of democracy. And you can measure the difference and the impact and how we were able to make the economy grow, how we were make it to lower social indicators, poverty, extreme poverty, illiteracy, access to health system. I mean, there are so many clear indications that in the case of Paraguay at least, democracy deliver much better results. So we need to not take it for granted, but show in the numbers. And I think the same we need to do for global trade. I think that we need to show that we're going to have better outcomes on this. So I think in the building the trust, we need to come to the table, not only convince ourselves, but how can we are able to convince others with strong arguments and evidence that this is the right way to do. The representative of Guatemala, y le voy a responder en español también, en base a su pregunta. Honduras, de hermanos vecinos, Honduras. Paraguay, en mi opinión, es el secreto mejor guardado. Yo creo que Paraguay es una gema escondida que nosotros los paraguayos por mucho tiempo la quisimos esconder. Entonces nuestra estrategia es salir a mostrarla, es salir a hablar de nuestras fortalezas, también de las debilidades que tenemos, porque tenemos todavía muchas debilidades, tenemos un largo camino por delante para hacer del Paraguay una nación próspera y desarrollada. Mi objetivo de corto plazo es que Paraguay sea un miembro pleno de la OCDE, de la OSD. Creemos que eso va a ser un paso muy importante. Y por supuesto, esto no viene si no es gracias al proceso de cambios y de reformas. Y estamos haciendo muchas reformas. Y creo que este es el camino también que tenemos que llevar para las instituciones multilaterales y los cambios que necesitan las organizaciones multilaterales. Las mejoras no van a venir de la noche a la mañana, vienen como consecuencia de los cambios que tenemos que proponer. Y ahí donde Paraguay quiere ser parte de esos cambios, quiere proponer de manera positiva los cambios que necesitan estas organizaciones. On the third question, on how to avoid geopolitical tensions, we need more women coming to the negotiation table. Absolutely. I will encourage Dr. Ngozi to be louder. She's already loud, but to be louder. And I see that there is a group of at the very high level of leadership, and I will put also Kristalina Georgieva, from an institution that I know very well, which is the IMF, which was very shy. The IMF was very shy and a very opaque institution. Nobody was, they were all afraid about the IMF, and she has changed this view. It's not that the previous leadership was not doing this, because Madame Lagarde was also doing that. In fact, for us economists, it was like, it was very hard to swallow that for the first time we had a non-economist running the IMF. She's a lawyer, a very good one, and she was very good in outreaching and getting closer to the world stage. So I think that for the leadership that really and truly believe on this, we need to encourage them. We need to encourage leadership in a positive way to convince others and try to bring egos down and to put on the back and try to achieve a much better outcome. I have no doubt that we need to leave behind that image of being shy and thinking, oh, I'm doing my part here in my corner, I don't need to bother others. No, we need to be very bold, we need to be outspoken and to raise our voice. I think it was the gentleman of Malaysia who was also thinking the same way as Paraguay, as a middle nation. I think that there is a challenge for us, for middle nations or middle powers. We need to team up, we need to group together. There is no group for middle nations that are able to play this bridge. We are trying to play this bridge independently and in solitary. And I think that if we were able to group together a group of 20 middle nations that are not a problem, maybe we can call the no trouble countries group. We are not in trouble, but we suffer from the trouble of large nations or from the difficulties of small nations. So I think that we need to think of it that we have more power than the ones that we think we have. And there's so much more that we could do and to bring to the table. So definitely, and maybe the WTO can be one of these scenarios and forums, so middle nations can team up together and work to bridge between small nations and larger nations. On trade finance and developing financial, the role of the multilateral institution, absolutely, I fully agree with you. The system is not working anymore, in my view. What brought the multilateral system after World War II, it was a great idea, not only to preserve peace, but also to give tools to middle and small nations, the access to financing. For many of our nations, the only source of financing for investment was coming from the World Bank, it was coming from the IMF, it was coming from regional institutions. Many of the nations, and the example of Paraguay is one of them, we have graduated from multilateral institutions as the only source of financing. We raise capital from the international markets, not only in foreign currency, but also in our national currency. So this is a level of trust on the country that is very good. But that trust doesn't translate to the private sector. The private sector is still very, very far away from that level. So we need multilateral institutions to maybe focus less on the sovereign nations, and more on the private sector. Because at the end, we are saying that the private sector is the one who creates the wealth and is the one who is doing the trade. It's not the government who is doing the trade. We create the conditions. But they have to face a lot of difficulties, access to, and I'm not talking only to SMEs, which is a problem everywhere, but also to large corporations. They don't get the type of access to financing the same way that large countries have. And this is in part because of also the wave of regulation that has come from developed nations. AML, for example. AML has been a quite improvement to fight illegal activities, anti-money laundering, and these regulations, who are very strict and very high, works in different ways to different countries, right? Because the regulation have imposed costs to financial institutions, the know your clients, the due diligence that you need to do, right? So for international banks that they need to decide whether they're going to put money to understand a small country versus a large country, they said it's not worth the money. I just go to the large country. So de-risking has happened to many of our middle-sized economies. And this is seriously damaging international trade, because this is one of the sources of not having access, is the financing. So I fully agree with you. This is one of my main critics. I'm a strong supporter of multilateral financial institutions, but I'm very critical on the approach that they said, because the easy thing is to give money to a sovereign. The hard part is to give money to the private sector, and no word to SMEs. And the last word to the representative of Nigeria, and you were talking that there are so many other issues, and you are right, there are so many other issues that you can address. But I will say that WTO should focus on the things that are on the table now. I think the issues that I have mentioned, agricultural restrictions, the settlement resolution system, I think these are fundamental. These are at the backbone. On the other issue, what I will strongly encourage is that the WTO team up with other institutions that probably have a better comparative advantage on those issues, on financial inclusion, on e-commerce. I have no doubt that the Secretary General Ngozi have the knowledge of what are the expertise that she will find at the World Bank, she will find at the IMF, and many other institutions that are working. So I would strongly suggest that the WTO can also be a partner with other institutions to addressing those increasing demands and issues. And I really appreciate it. I can do this for the entire day.
Offer taken. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. President, but after 33 years of marriage, I have learned that I must always give the last word to the woman on the stage. Dr. Ngozi, do you have any last words that you would like to share with us?
My last words are just to say a very deep thank you to the President for a very engaging, now 1.5 hours, and to you, Hung Sen, for piloting us through this question and answer. Very thoughtful questions, and, you know, I like your very relaxed approach to taking on the questions and answering them. So I know that people have stayed a long time, so I'll leave it there and just say thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.